When Captain Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership of Burkina Faso, many expected another chapter in the country's long struggle with instability. But what the world didn't see coming was his swift and strategic dismantling of a vast international corruption network. It all began with a routine audit of government contracts that unearthed suspicious financial links between foreign corporations and domestic intermediaries. Unlike his predecessors, Traoré didn't sweep the findings under the rug. Instead, he ordered a full-scale investigation that would stretch across borders, uncovering hidden shell companies, rigged procurement deals, and offshore accounts tied to powerful global elites. The first blow came when Traoré publicly released a classified dossier detailing irregularities in Burkina Faso's mining sector. Billions in untaxed profits had been siphoned through a labyrinth of shadowy firms operating in tax havens. The companies were tied to multinational conglomerates and protected by layers of diplomatic immunity. Rather than backing down, Traoré named names, executives, banks, and complicit former officials. This transparency shocked international observers. His boldness inspired whistleblowers in other African nations to come forward, each revealing how their own countries had been trapped in the same exploitative web. Traoré then moved fast. He established a sovereign anti-corruption tribunal, granting it powers to prosecute both domestic and foreign entities. The tribunal included international legal experts, transparency watchdogs, and respected local jurists. This body began freezing assets, subpoenaing documents, and issuing arrest warrants. Under Traoré's directive, Burkina Faso began cancelling corrupt contracts and reclaiming control of its national resources. The message was clear: no more backdoor deals. Several international corporations caught in the net tried to apply pressure through diplomatic channels, but Traoré refused to be intimidated. "Our sovereignty is not for sale," he declared in a televised address. As investigations deepened, evidence emerged linking this network to global money laundering schemes. Funds from Africa were being funneled into real estate in Europe, private islands in the Caribbean, and political lobbying in Washington and Brussels. Traoré shared his intelligence with select allies, sparking coordinated raids and investigations in multiple countries. Embassies were raided, laptops seized. A secret server farm in Dubai, containing encrypted financial data, was cracked with help from independent cybersecurity experts. Suddenly, what started as a national corruption probe in a small West African country became a full-blown international scandal. One of the most explosive revelations came from intercepted communications between executives of a major energy firm and top-tier politicians in Europe. These emails laid out how bribery was disguised as consulting fees, how elections were influenced to maintain access to African resources, and how media narratives were shaped to silence reformers. Traoré released parts of this evidence during a summit with other African leaders, urging them to launch similar investigations. His government also partnered with investigative journalists worldwide, providing them access to verified documents. Soon, major headlines around the globe were dominated by what was being dubbed Africa Leaks. Retaliation came quickly. Cyber attacks targeted Burkina Faso's infrastructure. International aid was suddenly suspended. A disinformation campaign tried to paint Traoré as a dictator and destabilizer, but he countered these moves with calm strategy, boosting national cybersecurity, launching public information campaigns, and leaning on growing public support. Most importantly, he found powerful allies in unexpected places: grassroots activists, independent media, and a few brave diplomats who saw through the manipulation. What could have been his undoing instead galvanized support. The people viewed him not just as a soldier or head of state, but as a liberator fighting economic colonization. Traoré's most significant achievement came when a former finance minister from a neighboring country, now in exile, turned himself in to Burkina Faso's authorities. He handed over a trove of hard drives implicating more officials and institutions. With this evidence, Traoré brokered a major international legal summit in Accra. There, with representatives from over 20 countries, he led the signing of the Pan-African Anti-Corruption Pact, an unprecedented agreement to share intelligence, extradite fugitives, and freeze illicit assets. Legal scholars hailed it as a turning point in post-colonial economic justice. Burkina Faso had become a symbol of resistance. Back home, Traoré continued reforming internal systems. He digitized public spending records, opened government contracts to public scrutiny, and installed anti-bribery AI software in customs and revenue offices. Citizen oversight councils were formed in every province. These measures drastically reduced petty corruption and improved public services. International agencies, though still cautious, began recognizing the effectiveness of his governance. Traoré wasn't merely reacting, he was building new systems that made corruption exponentially harder to hide. Schools reopened, hospitals were restocked, and farmers began receiving direct subsidies, tangible signs of a new era taking root. Perhaps the most surprising outcome was the global ripple effect. Inspired by Burkina Faso's example, civil society groups across Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe began demanding similar audits and reforms. The United Nations, once hesitant, eventually praised Traoré's efforts in a special assembly on financial transparency. Meanwhile, key figures implicated in the corruption network were tried in international courts. Some received prison sentences, others had their assets repatriated to the nations they had looted. Traoré's model was being studied in law schools and think tanks as a blueprint for anti-corruption in developing nations. In the end, Ibrahim Traoré had not only disrupted a deeply entrenched global corruption machine, he had awakened a movement that saw sovereignty not just as freedom from colonial chains, but as the right to justice, transparency, and dignity. Though he faced immense resistance, his legacy was being written not in headlines, but in empowered citizens, fairer courts, and independent institutions. The world had underestimated him, but in doing so, they had given him the element of surprise, and he used it not just to resist, but to rebuild.